papers for that now. So check your bottom right-hand corner, because there's probably an update that may come along and surprise you in a minute. Otherwise, I'll just do, so I'm starting my agenda up now, so hopefully we'll log in this time. Otherwise, you'll see the computer. The computer, stop. Move on. Anyway, no, right. Members, thank you. Before we start going away, okay. Thank you very much for taking the time to come along today. Welcome everyone to this meeting of Children and Families Scrutiny Committee on the 20th of October. I will run through the important bits. Before we proceed, can I check that everyone, can you hear me online? Just a thumbs up or a, please confirm online. Can you hear me? Thank you, Joe. You were on that one. Okay, the agenda pack is published online and ModGov access directly. There are some confidential items in today's papers. So members, I will make clear and remind you all. I know you know this, but I'll say it out loud anyway. There is, of course, a need for the confidential papers for a reason. So please remember that in conversations and debate, and we'll get to that when we get there. If I invite you to speak, could you please clearly state your name for the benefit of anyone who's listening who is new to this committee? As always, please, members, don't save until the person presenting finishes talking to indicate that you'd like to ask a question. Indicate as we go, because then the Vice Chair and I can keep up, and it saves me having to ask the first question. There's an audio recording being taken for this meeting. Again, as it's electronically, can you please make reference to the appropriate pages so that people can keep up if you're making specific points? And then just in this respect of housekeeping, there is no fire alarm expected. So should they sound, please follow Democratic Services officers appropriately, and we will deal with it that way. Okay, apologies for absence, please.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, committee. We've received apologies for absence from Councillor O'Donnell. We've also received apologies from Councillor Cravis, for whom Councillor Johnson is substituting. I understand Councillor Snell is running slightly late. Councillor Hendry from the committee is online, Chair, as is the Executive Director of Children's Services, Claire Winter.
Thank you, everyone. Are there any other apologies? No, thank you. Moving on then, declarations of interest. Members are asked to make declarations of interest that are not covered in their formal declaration and relevant for the papers in front of you today. Councillor Hunt.
You appear to have missed agenda item 12. Did you do the minutes? I've got 12 on my bit of paper.
Well spotted.
Minutes, sorry.
So, agenda item 2. It's minutes of the last meeting. Thank you for, as you can tell, I may have been on holiday and it's taken me a while to get back into the. So, first of all, are there any matters arising or points to clarity? Councillor Hunt.
At the last meeting, I did give my apologies that I would be late coming in on Teams because I had another meeting to go to. That's not mentioned here. My name is mentioned in the meeting as speaking, but apparently I'm not attending. So.
That's noted, and that adjustment to be made. Thank you, Sławek.
Sławek Nowakiewicz, a co-opted member. Just for information, because we'll be discussing today the PRU consultation, and I'm newly appointed governor for SSPS.
Okay, that's a declaration of interest. So thank you. I'll acknowledge that. Any matters or points in relation to the minutes? I've got one. Number 14 was public question time. It made reference, we had a question submitted, but there was no comment there in relation to that a written response has been provided. Can we confirm, please, that a written response has been provided? And can I ask that in normal process, as with full council, it's circulated to members of the committee if it has?
It has been, the parents have had a formal response. It was only last week, and it was sent, I believe, by Angie, PA, into the sort of scrutiny team. So I don't know what happened to it after that. Thank you.
So just for the minutes, then a response has been sent, and just for noting, we'll get that circulated to all members of the committee so that we've got that. Okay, thank you. moving on then, if there are no, members, are we happy to acknowledge that there are a true set of minutes? No objections. Okay, that's done. Item 3, declarations of interest. We've got one from Swavak. Are there any other additional declarations? Okay, that's that one. Item number 3. Item number 4, public question time. I'm not aware of any public questions. No, that's correct. So moving on. Okay. Before item 4, that's item 4 dealt with. Yeah, item 5. Members, before we start the substantive items of the agenda, a little plea, please. There are 5 really interesting items of agenda we have today, and in theory, some of us would like to get away at the earliest opportunity. I welcome input and comments, but let's not get to the last item and wishing we had more time. So if I could ask for your to be as concise as you can when it comes to items. And one point, the 2 points to make. As is always the case, scrutiny is asked to make recommendations should they see fit on the items that are presented in front of us. There are at least 2 items which are going to be going to executive at some point or in the near future. So if you do have any recommendations, if you'd like to make that point, I can then start making my notes as we go. So recommendations, should we want to make them. And the bit that I think is going to be the most slightly contentious amongst you, but I will make the point because I think it's only fair to do so. We need to try and steer clear of parochial stuff, your casework, things that are relevant to you in your division. The items that we're here to talk about, they are important, and I fully accept that. However, there is a process in place for you to take those items. So hypothetically, if in your division there may be some disparity between, maybe, let's say, school data, for example, just one off the top of my head, let's not spend 20 minutes talking about that particular item. Let's talk about the policy in front of us. And can you please deal with your individual items? They are important, I recognise that, but through the processes we have, and I know that officers are happy to do that should you have any local issues. The policies we're talking about, the decisions today are at a more strategic level. Your own local issues for you and your electors are important. But as I say, I'm happy to stay here till 7 if you want to, but ideally we need to be finished by 5. So I make that point now because I will have, and unless there's any major contention, I will remind members of it should they dally towards getting a little bit parochial in some of their things. That's me off of my soapbox for now. We're moving on then. Item 5 of our agenda is our forward work programme, etc., etc. You will notice that our outcome tracker has been slimmed. Thank you to officers for the time spent with the Vice Chair and myself to do that. Hopefully what it will mean is that the outcome tracker will become, rather than be 3 or 4 pages or 4 or 5 pages, it will be a more concise item to remind us of things that we've said we would do, etc. We're also there, and you will notice that because the October meeting is late, there will be no November meeting, but we are in early December for our next meeting. There is already an outline there of a draft agenda, but I'm conscious that decisions are coming forward at some haste now that may mean that we will change it. So what I will hope that we do is with officers, meeting officers, that we can refine that agenda so that we can become clearer with that as we go. Any points, comments or issues in relation to our forward work plan, members? I'd like to thank those members that did listen before and have kindly, if they have any points to raise, emailed them to myself and or the Vice Chair, because it means that we can understand your positions and your points better, and that we can make sure that we can get them answered and added to as we go. As is always the case, you are my eyes and ears. We cannot be everywhere. So any suggestions for items to look at or points that we need to clarify are welcomed. Okay. Moving on then, item 6 of our agenda is the pupil referral unit consolidation. The clarity around that will be as we have. the reports have been circulated along with the slides and presentations. I know that that officers will be asking for maybe to either speed through them where relevant or catch up with them if necessary. But otherwise, Heather, do you want to introduce Phil for this one?
Very quickly, because Phil's got all of the information that you're going to need. But yes, exactly as you described, it's around consolidation. A big part, a number of the reports that are going to come forward to you over the next few months are all integral to our deficit management plan, as well as doing our work better and in a more transformed and a better way. This is one of them. The PRUs, we are trying, this is the first stage in a series of activities to try and increase the consistency and quality of offer for the 4 PRUs that we have currently in the county. There are 2 areas, one to the north and one to the south west, which are not covered by PRUs, but they have other arrangements, and we'll come to those ones later in the process. But at the moment, we're trying to just make the 4 PRUs work more effectively. And whereas you can, it's going to be a tricky one, this one, and we'll take you through it. But technically speaking, in order to try to do what we want to do to improve the consistency, you cannot amalgamate PRUs, as far as I understand it. So we have to effectively, make a closure of a school. No school will close at all, but we want to make some changes to the way we manage the 4 schools so that we can manage in a more effective way. Phil will take you through that one, but there's a technicality around, we have to talk about closure, and we have gone out to, we've also gone out to consultation as well, and Phil will take you through the outcomes of that. So just to say that it is part of a greater scheme, and Phil will take you through it. Thank you.
Yeah, okay. Aisha, have you got the slides there, please? On their way.
Perfect. Thank you, Chair. Next slide, please. So to give you just a brief introduction, picking up on Heather's very comprehensive introduction, Somerset has 4 pupil referral units. Currently, they're located in Bridgwater, Taunton, Glastonbury and Yeovil, and we have 2 behaviour partnerships in Frome and West Somerset, where schools receive delegated funding to meet the Section 19 duties of the council. Key challenges for us with so many moving parts are consistency and quality of provision, noting that South Somerset Partnership School had an adverse Ofsted inspection in the late part of last year, and part of this process is designed to tackle that judgment. Next slide, please. So that's just a map which sets out where the 4 PRUs are, and they are mapped onto the 6 locality areas that we use in Somerset to structure our client-facing teams. So in terms of the consolidation model, key outcomes we are trying to achieve are to improve the consistency and the quality of the provision within our 4 pupil referral units. This process, and we'll call this stage 1, does not pick up the 2 behaviour partnership areas, but it is our intention as part of a stage 2 of this work to pick them up at a later date. So what we are intending to do through a key decision taken by executive on the 5th of November is to amalgamate the 4 PRUs into 2 PRUs, which will involve technical closures. So we are looking to have a 2 PRU model, a PRU in the east and a PRU in the west. Key benefits: consistency of provision, quality of provision, equity and of offer in West Somerset and Frome as part of our stage 2 work, the opportunity to develop locality hubs. So at the moment we have the 4 main built hubs in Bridgwater, Taunton, Yeovil and Glastonbury. there is an opportunity, it's probably a stage 3 of this work, to put more physical intervention hubs in communities all around the county. So children that require small group provision or transition from home to school are able to receive that provision really close to home rather than travelling into a pupil referral unit. There's also the opportunity to develop holding roles as part of our PRUs. So currently at any given time, we have between 200 or 300 children who are absent from school. They are not in a school place and they are missing from the system. Our oversight of those children, excuse me, is not particularly strong. So what we would look to do as part of this work is put those 200 to 300 children on a notional or virtual role associated with the pupil referral units and put much stronger safeguarding processes in place for those children. A byproduct is that the system will also be funded for those children because they will be captured on our regular censuses. There's also, as part of a stage 2, the opportunity to refocus the resources in the PRU. So each of those PRUs will have a multitude of back office functions, and as we merge and amalgamate, we can look at centralising some of those to release resources to teaching and learning, working with children and their families directly. And of course, we have the ability to streamline our commissioning and governance, ultimately working with 2 PRUs rather than 4 PRUs and 2 behaviour partnerships. So in terms of creating the proposals, we had 2 design workshops. So we met in March of this year and then agreed to meet with the head teachers of the PRUs, representatives of the behaviour partnerships and the chairs and vice chairs of the management committees of the pupil referral units to sit for 2 whole mornings and work out exactly what model we would take for consultation, which model would offer on balance the best outcomes. And the upshot of those workshops was a proposal to have 2 pupil referral units, each with a head teacher, overseen or supported by an executive head teacher function rather than an executive head teacher. And the reason we can't have an executive head teacher is because you cannot federate a pupil referral unit, so they can't sit on the establishment. So what we're looking to do once we have appointed the head teachers is produce a partnership agreement which brings in a range of challenge and support functions from a third party as part of an executive head teacher function. So that's very much part of our stage 1 work, and that partnership agreement will be in place for the 1st of April 2026 as and when the 2 new PRUs are up and running. So this is roughly what the proposal will look like. We'll have a pupil referral unit in the east, a pupil referral unit in the west. Each will have a head teacher that is responsible to their management committee, which is a pupil referral unit of a governing body. And there will be this executive head teacher function, which is there to support and challenge those head teachers and making sure that the 2 schools are working together to improve consistency and quality. So the detail of the proposal is that South Somerset Partnership School will close, essentially be amalgamated with Tor School, and Tor School in Glastonbury will absorb all of its built provision. So no physical building will close, no child will go to a different place of education, and no member of staff will have to work from a different location. Everything will remain as it is, but technically 4 school registrations will become 2 school registrations, and that's why we have to use the word closure. Now, in our consultation activity, many people understood closure to be physical buildings closing, and there were lots of concerns about that, but that is not the case. We don't plan on closing any buildings. Actually, as part of our stage 3 work in this exercise, we want to create more built provision and put that provision closer to where children live, particularly in our more rural communities. So part 1 is South Somerset Partnership School will close. It will be amalgamated with Tor School. Tor School will expand. Taunton Deane Partnership College will close. It will amalgamate with the Bridge School, and the Bridge School will expand to adopt all of its built provision sites. And both of those closures will take place on the 31st of March 2026, and the amalgamated schools will be open on the 1st of April 2026. That is the proposed timeline, or the timeline so far. So we published our proposal and consulted on the 9th of July. That formal representation period went from the 9th of July until the 12th of September. We then considered all of that feedback, and on the 5th of November, we are asking the executive to take the decision to implement. We will then begin recruitment process for the 2 head teachers, and there are currently 2 substantive heads who are ring fenced but subject to a recruitment process for those posts. They will start in post on the 1st of January and will have a 3-month period where they are reviewing the whole of the provision, essentially supporting 2 schools whilst the amalgamation takes place on the 31st of March 2026. Then on the 1st of April, we have our new model. So in terms of the consultation, we had 71 responses, it's a relatively high number of responses for a statutory education consultation. 5 are from organisations, 66 from individuals. In addition, we had a letter from the Somerset Association of Secondary Head Teachers. 8 people requested a callback. We were able to contact 7 of those. We couldn't get through to the 8th. Of the individual responses, 19 said they were in favour, 46 said they didn't support them, and 1 chose not to answer the question. Of those, 11 mentioned concerns specifically relating to the physical closure of school buildings, which we stated as not being the case as clearly as we could in both the decision paper and the proposal document. There were a number of supportive comments. Some examples are on the screen in front of you, and on the next screen we had some more critical comments. And again, in the commentary that we received, there was talk about things closing, children having to travel further, which again is not the case. Next screen, please. Next slide. That's it. Happy to take any questions, Chair. Thank you.
That's the final one. Thank you. Okay, thank you for that, Phil. Just a couple of points that the format of the report I thought was really informative. As I was reading down, I was thinking, oh, this consultation, where is it? Where is it? And so the fact that you brought it forward and clarified some of the points, I think was really helpful in it, because one of the things I was saying with it all, it's great to have lots of responses, but do we consider those, and can we, so that the fact that it's clear there that we do, I think is a really good thing. Okay, members, Councillor Hadley and Andy.
Thank you, Chair. I think I've got my head around this. Just my clarification, I'm assuming that if one of the school closes but then amalgamates with the other school then takes on the previous school buildings as part of that school. I think I've got my head around that. Yeah. There are savings to be made on governance. And I understand that you said you've got 2 ring-fenced head teachers that are possibly going to be slotted into those 2 positions. Am I right in thinking at the moment that the 4 schools all have a head teacher each? So we will be losing 2 head teachers. My concern is that the school that is amalgamated, being quite a distance away from the mother school, is not going to have a head teacher on the site, and the governance arrangements are going to be, or could be, poorer for that school without having the senior governance team there. And that is a concern to me, especially when they're vulnerable kids. They need the discipline and the tuition on that site. So what sort of things are going to be in place to ensure that the school buildings at the other side of town that don't have a head teacher on site are going to be managed properly?
So just before Phil gives the proper technical answer, there's a couple things I just want to pick up at the beginning, and I don't know whether we said it quite emphatically in the presentation. I probably didn't say it at all. Oh, right. I've got to put my best. I'm getting into pantomime season and start doing more projecting. I need to do more of that, but it'd be better with this in front of me. First of all, just to say the rationale for doing this is not about saving money in this case at all. This is really about improving the chances and the opportunities and the outcomes for the children who go through our PRU system. That will in itself save some money down the line for us, but the restructure is not on the grounds of saving money by taking people out of the equation. And as I understand it, and Phil will come and say this much more emphatically, there may not be a head teacher, but there would always be in each school, there would absolutely be the same management sort of team that you would have. And what I suppose we're hoping is that the greater that executive direction, if you like, across the top, will improve all of the inputs in the schools. And the two schools that were each of the two schools would still have professional support in them. They just might not have somebody with a head teacher name, but there would be support there. Phil will give the better answer on that, but I just didn't want to miss the bit about we're not doing it to save money.
Thank you, Heather. Thank you, Andy. To answer the first part of your question, there are currently 4 PRUs, but there are only 2 substantive head teachers. When we commenced the process, there were 3 substantive head teachers. One of those resigned. So the head teacher at South Somerset Partnership School resigned. They left in the summer. There is an acting head teacher in that post. And in the Bridge School in Sedgemoor, there is a head of school that reports to an executive head teacher as part of a partnership agreement with the Poldham Borough Federation. So we just have the 2 head teachers covering their schools. Now, just building on Heather's point, whilst if we look at our PRUs in their current structures, our PRUs are typically not single site schools. So other than the Tor School, which is a single site school in Glastonbury, South Somerset Partnership School is a multi-site school. So it has 2 sites in Yeovil and a site in Chard under 1 head teacher normally. So each building will have a different purpose or function, different cohort of kids, either by age or need type, and each building will have a head of centre. So there is a leader and a leadership structure everywhere there is physical provision, if that makes sense. And the head teacher's job is to be across the whole operation as regularly as possible to make sure that everything is consistent as it can be. If we then go to Taunton Deane Partnership School, that is a 3-site school. So that has 2 sites in Taunton and a site just up on the hills. And then if we go to the Bridge School, that is a 3-site school. There are 2 sites in Bridgewater and a site in Cossington. So PRUs working across multiple sites is not a new concept. We have the leadership structures in place to make sure that provision and quality is where it should be.
And alongside that, the safeguarding protocols are there as well to reflect it as well. I think that's correct in that. So is that your question answered, Andy?
Yes, because of the nature of the report, and it mentions schools, it gives me and other people the opinion that it's just 1 school. So yeah, I'm a lot more satisfied now. Thank you.
It's good, and our PRU model is a proven one, and I think it works reasonably well. No, it works very well for us. But that's okay. John Hunt, Councillor Hunt, sir.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Andy's stolen all of my questions, bar one, so I could be very brief. I got a little bit confused, which is easily done, about the executive head function. So I appreciate it's not going to be an actual human being, but who is it actually going to cover that? That's why I got a little bit lost. So at the moment we've got, say, the West area, for example, we'll have, I'm assuming, 6 buildings involved in that 1 unit, as it were, and then an executive body overseeing that. So how does that work exactly?
Thank you, John. It's a good question, because this is something new, and we are actively innovating in this space. So we can't have an executive head teacher. You can't have an individual, because you can't federate the 2 schools. So you can't formally have someone that's responsible for both. So what we are looking to do once we have the substantive heads in post, or at least head teacher designates later, probably in November, between November and Christmas, we will then work with those head teacher designates and their management committees to define the specification for the executive head teacher function. So it's something that I'm already working on. I've got a 5-page document which kind of sets out in broad terms what we want from the function, but there will be stuff around inclusion support, curriculum support, safeguarding advice. We will look at the opportunity to develop back office functions at some point in the future. When we have the head teacher designates identified, we will work with them and specify exactly in an appendix what activities do you want to be provided with in terms of support and challenge from this third party. Once we have defined exactly what we want, then we will seek expressions of interest from those parties that we think are relevant. So we will go through an open process, inviting expressions of interest. We will sit down, probably as a joint committee of the local authority and the two PRU management committees, to go through any expressions of interest we receive, and then offer the position to whichever we think is the most appropriate party, and sign up to a partnership agreement, probably for 3 years in the first instance. And within that agreement, we'll have regular reviews, the ability to add things in, take things away, and essentially give ourselves as much security but also flexibility as possible. So it is really new, but we need an innovative solution to what is quite a complex problem.
So members, just to figure it, so I've already made it. One of our recommendations may be to executive that a clearer outline of the roles, well, of the structure of both the buildings and where they sit within the president and the staff, particularly around the executive head, needs to be included so that that reads better, so that the decision maker will have the necessary information available to them. I'm making that point now so that we don't go over it again. So Francis, Councillor Nicholson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, I think we really do want to keep an eye on that, not least because I had read on page 40 that an additional executive head appointed, and that made me think it was clearly a person. However, I think we just need to be up to date on that and really understand it to make sure it works. I am very supportive of the way of working. I asked a lot of questions, had very helpful answers. There remains only one question from me, particularly given that I was very helpfully, but the risk scores, once mitigation has been in place, have been added to the paper, and that relieves my mind, particularly over the academisation threat, which really appears to have gone right down. I read this paper having already read the school organisation place planning item, in which on page 87 it says the communities of West Somerset and of Frome, i.e. the east of Somerset, are notably isolated from this type of provision, talking about PRUs, and will be priority areas for the delivery of additional state maintained alternative provision. I think that it would be really helpful if that could be recommended to words like that to be added at page 39 of this on this paper, where it merely says the expansion of the two remaining PRUs to absorb the behaviour partnerships and their devolved responsibilities will come at a later stage with a target date of September 2026. That felt to me as though really not much attention had been paid. Appreciate this is about these PRUs, but I think that the force of the sentence from the later paper would be really helpful in the public acceptance of this paper on both fringes of the county. Quick enough?
Bill?
Thank you, Chair. Valid point. I just assure Francis that Frome and West Somerset has very much been part of our initial thinking. The behaviour partnerships have been involved in the co-production of the proposal. It was the behaviour partnerships which asked for their stage of the work to be pushed back to September 2026 to give them more time to transition and also provide us with the information about the staff that are currently funded with the devolved funding in those areas. So we do have those staff lists, and we are already thinking about September 2026 and what that will look like for those communities.
Thank you very much. The fact is, this is a public paper, and I don't think that the force of that of what you're doing would be in the current wording apparent to parents or whatever. And I think it might be helpful just to notice the force of the other paper.
Okay, just so that I make sure that we're picking up the points as we go, could you just drop in the chat just to quickly your point, and we'll just make sure that we pick that up at the end to make sure that it's, because the reason I'm doing it this way because I didn't quite get the full context, so that'll be clarity there. Habib, I do have you, so but bear with me. Let me deal with the room first. Jenny, please, Councillor Snell.
Thank you. I'm going to ask that it be put in really simple terms, because even us just we're going, so is it a real person? Is it not a real person? Even we were slightly confused. I'd just like to ask that the head teachers, I presume they're going to spend equal amount of time between both. I know there's lots of buildings, but between both schools, having worked in schools and right now in a college, the minute the head teacher and the principal aren't there and you've got something to ask and you can't get in touch with anybody, I know it doesn't happen very often, but sometimes that person is physically needed to have a conversation with. Will they always be at the end of either an email or a phone call? That's it.
Thank you. Yeah, I think head teachers splitting their time across sites is for the head teachers to determine. But I think if we look at this scenario, there are likely to be two substantive heads that are adopting, will have half of their school will be brand new to them. So I would expect them to prioritise more of their time being in those slightly more alien environments while they get up to speed. And then once that's stabilised, the head teachers, they may split their time 50-50. They may spend more of their time where they think they need to prioritise their time. So they will kind of do that dynamic risk assessment and go, actually, right now, I need to be here more than there because this is where I'm carrying the bulk of my risk. But yeah, we would expect those head teachers to be mobile across the site so they are visible to their staff and their learners.
Yeah, and I support that. And they need to have the flexibility to be able to do it. But I think the issue there is more a matter of areas of responsibility. The centre managers will be the ones that have the more local impact, and but the escalation process, I'm sure, will be there. But that will be clarified. I think that's one of the points that needs to be made a little bit clearer. Okay, members, keep dropping in. So happy, bear with me. Dawn, please.
Thank you, Chair. It's just a simple question. It's my ignorance, I'm afraid. Just on the back of what Francis was saying, can pupil referral units become academised? And do they become academised? Is that a fear for a future at all?
Thank you, Dawn. Yes, they can be. They then become known as Alternative Provision Academies or AP Academies. And it does make commissioning with the local authority more complicated. And actually, locally, it would generate concerns, I think, with LA maintained schools and other academy trusts that a pupil referral unit being in one multi-academy trust might be to the detriment of pupils in other multi-academy trusts. Now, when South Somerset Partnership School received its adverse Ofsted judgment, it was issued with a direct academy order. So it was on the pathway to becoming an academy. And this work in part is to tackle that. So we are closing South Somerset Partnership School to avoid it becoming an academy, because we do not think it would be helpful within our system to have an academy pupil referral unit.
Thank you. Pauline, Councillor Hand.
Thank you, Chair. It's just a very simple, quick question. I assume both the substantive heads are happy to take on this extra burden of the two PRUs within their remit.
Thanks, Pauline. So both substantive heads are subject to a recruitment process. I believe both have expressed an interest in the new posts. So my assumption is, yes, they are happy to take on that additional burden. But of course, the remuneration for that more complex workload will be part of the package as well.
Thank you. Okay, going online then. Habib.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Phil, for the presentation. Page 3 on the executive summary. The report asserts that amalgamation will improve consistency, but provides little or no measurable evidence or performance targets. It reassures us that no child will move school or face longer travel times, but fails to show how consolidation will raise education outcomes and the staff quality. On page 4 to 7 on the background, I noticed that it lists 4 pupil referral units, but there is no performance comparison so that we can see which, looking at staff levels, data, reintegration, and so on. 1.5 on paragraph 1.4, it mentions behavior partnership with Frome and West Somerset, but acknowledge on the provision without remedial planning. On links to council plan and MTFP, page 9, the link to the council plan, paragraph 3.1, is generic in my view, and no direct to high need block recovery or sender strategy. Perhaps clarification can be sought on those points. Thank you.
Lost you on some of the pages, Habib. So I got you on because
page 9. Can you hear me?
so we're on different. Are you on the online version or
yes,
your?
yes, on a specific item 6. It refers to links to the council plan and MTFP.
Okay, so just for clarity, Habib, the papers for us for Agenda Items start at page 35.
Yeah, I mean, so I was looking at individual items rather than the whole items altogether.
Okay, because I got you make a similar point to Francis in relation to the so your point on page 36 for us and bullet point 1.4 talks about Frome and West Somerset and the element there for it. Then I think your last point was on page 37 for us, which is 3.1.
Yeah.
But I missed the middle.
I mean, basically, all I'm saying is there's no direct link to high need block recovery or sender strategy.
Okay, thank you. That's helped with clarity, Phil.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Habib. Just reiterating Heather's point, this consolidation is not about saving high needs money directly. We are not looking to reduce the budget that services to PRUs, which is worth about £7.9 million a year. What we would anticipate as part of the stage 2 is more of that resource being targeted on children and families and teaching and learning, as we're able to consolidate and maybe streamline some of the back office function. But if we think about, you asked some questions about quality, and I acknowledge that we don't have any details of the PRUs and their comparative performance in the paper, but I think the truth of it is our PRUs are a real mixed bag, and that is part of the issue. Generally speaking, attendance is low and too low, which will always impact on attainment and progress. In school, in the PRUs, some children do well in some subjects. They don't do well in other subjects. And a cornerstone of this activity is having that consistency across all provisions, so the majority of children in our PRUs are succeeding and able to transition to post-16 education successfully.
Okay, Habib, were you happy? Did that cover all your points?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, but I still remain concerned that there is no performance targets.
I think I don't want to lose your point, but I don't want to get us caught up, Habib. What I would suggest that it may be worth, just so you can get some clarification, the executive member, Heather Shearer, is in the room with us. If you want to email her directly your points, then I'll make sure that Heather picks that up when she feeds back when the executive make their decision. I don't want to lose your point, because I don't want for a council to be left concerned with something. So we'll do that way. Are there any other points or questions, members? Yes. Councillor Carswell.
Thank you very much, Chair. Just a quick question. On the travelling part, you say no pupil will be required to travel any further. What about going forward when new pupils come in? Are you looking going forward to perhaps close some of the more disparate centres you've got, because it seems you've got lots of different areas? So going forward, will children have to travel further?
Thank you, Simon. No, our intention is, as we get into the stage 3 of this work, is to have even more locations for children to access formal in-person or face-to-face provision. So currently, if you're in Wincanton, if you're a child in Wincanton, you will be travelling to Glastonbury. That is your area through. As we move forward, it would be great to have provision in Wincanton for Wincanton children to keep them close to school. I'm going out to visit Jonty, the head teacher at King Arthur's, to talk about alternative provision, formalising SEN units. We could do the same in Cheddar. We look to do the same in Frome. We could think about Shepton Mallet. The intention is to create much more provision using locality hubs to keep children close to home and reduce children having to travel into our main population centres.
Thank you. Okay, Sławek, I'll bring you in now. Just to remind you of your declaration of interest, if you could keep your questions to be generic, that would be helpful. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's exactly my intention. So, what I want to say, first of all, is that the model which is presented, it's not unusual. And if we look at this, the PRUs already have satellite units. I think where it comes to, it's their quality assurance and then making sure that the quality of all settings are really strong. So my questions around, for example, offset considerations, because amalgamating schools which are maybe not so strong in quality with a school which is stronger may put that school at risk. So I'm just wondering if that's kind of taken into consideration, and also what measures are put in place to avoid that, particularly now where we don't have still yet the structure of executive function. And follow up from these questions, I have one of the big things which the PRUs are providing is the outreach provisions for their localities. So I just wonder if that's kind of incorporated, if what that will look like moving forward from the funding point of view and the level of support. And my third question is around the children who are not on school roll, who will become on school roll. And I think you, Phil, mentioned around 200 pupils. How that will work, strategically, because this will require additional capacity from the schools to put that in place. It's the right thing, but it's how that will be managed. And also it's the longer plan for those children then to join the PRU, or how that will work in practice. Thank you.
Thanks, Sławek. So if I can remember those questions in order, we're confident that the amalgamation structured as they are will mean that the stronger of the PRUs in each of those areas will be the one that remains and absorbs the other areas. We know that our PRUs need support, and we have various officers working with our PRUs to strengthen their offers, particularly around curriculum and safeguarding, etc., etc. Then if we talk about outreach, so our PRUs already have outreach funding available to them, and we are in the process of determining what outreach funding in the pupil referral units will look like going forward. We are looking at reshaping what outreach in the pupil referral units look like, and one of our curriculum leads is working with our PRU heads to define the specification for ongoing outreach that comes from our pupil referral units. I acknowledge there will also be, historically has always been outreach funding going into our special schools as well, which you all know much more about, and we're in the process of looking at what that will look like going forward. There was a third question which I have forgotten. Quality assurance.
Yeah, it's the children who will be on the roll.
Yes, that was it. So what we anticipate is essentially, as a starting point, having a virtual role which is overseen by probably a small dedicated team sat within one or other of the PRUs. Now, the job one is getting those children onto a virtual role and having the capacity to safeguard them effectively. And then if we think about what Amelia Walker would describe as her flexible education model, we would then transition those children through that model. Even start point being some of those children are at home, they rarely leave their bedrooms, they rarely leave their homes, and it's that initial engagement activity, getting them into one-to-one tutoring, moving them into small group provision, and I've already referenced our intention to have small group provision in many more parts of the county. And then if we need to transition them into a pupil referral unit or a specialist education provision or enhanced learning provision in one of our mainstream schools. So we're looking at that flexible education pathway for all of those children and some children will proceed all the way to the end. Some children will stop halfway through, depending on their individual needs.
Okay, thank you, everyone. Thank you for that. Okay, just some feedback then. I'll pick Francis's point up first. The bit that's relevant, I think, Phil, is bullet point 6.15 on page 39, where it specifically highlights Frome and West Somerset areas. And I think the bit that Francis wants to be added, if you could add on, my suggestion would be that in your response, and that areas of isolated areas will be considered. Something along it brings together the point that she makes about allocation of places. Page 87 is the bullet point there. It's at the bottom of page 87. It talks about the communities of West Somerset and Frome are notably isolated from this type of provision. So that links in with the point you make. The point that it says it was raised about it, but if we just highlight that element, that covers that point. I think, Francis, we can read it. It acknowledges it. I understand where we're saying, but we need. Okay, thank you. So the general consensus is that the report is good and it has the information that's required. There are no, I don't think, any negative comments around the room in relation to the direction of travel. Scrutiny is supportive of that, and the bit that we needed clarity on is around the structure and the responsibilities of the senior staff in the clarity. I think the point that you made about having each of the areas have each of the schools have different sites is something that doesn't come across, and I think that would clarify there. And the point that it's a consolidation rather than a closure. So, but I think people, the committee are supportive, and the points will be noted. And what we'll do is make sure that those recommendations are written up so that we can make sure they're included when it goes to executive. Anything else I missed there, members? Okay, thank you. That's agenda item 6 done, Phil. Thank you for that. Don't go anywhere because you're coming back up later. Item 7 of our agenda then is an update on our report. Now, members, just for clarity, we had an update previously, and we asked for a little bit more detail around the complaints, etc. And this is an update on that position. Fiona, you're putting this to us, so I'd like to welcome Fiona. Still a relatively new head of virtual school, so if you want to introduce yourself and present the report. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Chair. I have got some slides. I'm happy to share those with you, or if you prefer that I just talk through and summarise the report that was sent through to you, whatever. The slides were shared with us, so we can assume members have looked at them. If you're happy to summarise and take questions, then I'm happy for that. Unless anyone wants any difference, no, go for it that way, Fiona. Thank you. Yeah. If you could move the microphone a little bit closer to you, those are particularly directional, but thank you. Better. Okay, so just starting with the sort of headline data on our stage 1 complaints and our members' inquiries. So as of the end of September, we had 29 open cases, 6 of which were members' inquiries. And we've had 149 SEND-related complaints that we've received this financial year to date. The majority of our complaints responded to were upheld or partly upheld, and half of the complaints received this financial year were responded to on time. Just looking at our data, we know that we are looking at more SEND complaints at stage 1 and members' inquiries coming through at this point compared to this point last year. And that is largely because of the delays that we have around our SEND assessments and the backlog that the educational psychology team are working through as quickly as they can. In terms of our stage 2 complaints, we've got 11 open cases, and 67% of our complaints received this financial year were responded to on time. They're largely fairly evenly spread. Typical number that we're receiving each month, sort of range between sort of 7 and 10 that are coming through and escalating through to stage 2. For our local government ombudsman, or LGO complaints and pre-actions, we've got 18 LGO cases open. 6 of these remain open from the 24-25 financial year. We've got 7 pre-actions currently open, and we have seen a steady increase in the number of pre-actions that we've had this year compared to previous years. And we're not clear why that might be, but we're looking to kind of unpick that a bit further. Again, fairly even spread of LGOs across each month. We're looking between 1 and 3 that we're working through. Looking at our statistical data for 23-24 from the LG SEO Council Performance Dashboard, if we look at Somerset, there's some helpful statistical data that helps us kind of reflect on where we are as a council. 87% of complaints investigated by the LGO were upheld, and that was based on 20 upheld decisions out of a total of 23 investigated in this period. In terms of the LGO finding the council providing satisfactory remedy before the complaint reached the Ombudsman, that was in 0% of our cases. That was based on 20 upheld decisions. And we've been working closely with the LGO and thinking about the learning that we can take and working to find those satisfactory remedies before it's reaching the Ombudsman. The LGO was satisfied the council had successfully implemented recommendations in 100% of cases, and that was based on 24 compliance outcomes in this period. And last week we had a meeting with the LGO. We're meeting regularly with them. I believe it's about 3 monthly. This was my first meeting with the LGO last week. It was a really positive meeting. They were really happy with the developments that we've got underway and what we've achieved. And I'll talk you through some of those developments in the next slides. But they were happy with what was progressing and the learning that we're taking from the LGO investigations and the evidence that we're sending back through to them in terms of what we have done to address the complaints. And they will continue to work with us on a 3 monthly basis, and our next meeting will be set in January. Thinking about the themes coming out of all of our complaints is the poor communication with officers, the delays in assessment for EHCPs, and the lack of Section 19 provision. You'll be aware that we have successfully secured our Section 19 policy, and we're working through the implementation of that, so we'll be able to share that with families and our settings. We're working hard around our communication, and a lot of the challenges that we have around those themes are really about the demand the rising demand for our educational healthcare plans and the additional strain on already stretched resources. But also the challenges that we've had around high vacancy rates across the virtual school and the assessment and review teams, which also impacts on service delivery, including the communication with our families. We have also struggled previous to the restructure. We didn't necessarily have a dedicated team supporting and responding to our complaints. We now have a dedicated team that's sitting in my area, although we have struggled to recruit to those new posts, but we have started to make some headway with that. And that meant we were working with a lack of capacity and resource, but also we were only able to work through the responses to the complaints and not actually focus on the learning and service development. So just thinking about our service development, we have now just secured a 6-month internal secondment to fill the service manager for disputes and resolutions. They've been in place from the 1st of October. And that has been really successful in terms of their experience and background in statutory send, but also in managing complaints and tribunals and mediations. We've got approval from the DMP for a new complaints officer, so we're looking to advertise for that post next week. And we have also secured an interim complaints officer to fill that role whilst we recruit to the permanent position. Our new service manager is now able to take ownership of complaint data, looking at the trends and the themes and the recurring issues that are coming through, and is working across our teams to drive forward service improvement. We've got a new send complaints mailbox. One of the challenges that we found is the communication around complaints is coming in through multiple routes and getting lost in the system, which is adding to the challenges around response times. And since we've had our new complaints mailbox, it's much more streamlined and our responses are much more timely. And we've also revised our complaints process and updated that process, worked collectively with our customer experience team and our colleagues working on the ground in Send. We've worked a lot with our internal staff around communication and ensuring that we are reaching out to families immediately and working closely with families to resolve issues whilst we're working in the background to do the complaint response. And actually we've had from our new feedback form that we've set up, we've had some really positive from families who have really appreciated the team reaching out to them, and whilst they may not be able to fully resolve, by just reaching out and knowing that they've been heard and that somebody is actively working through the issues has been much appreciated. So alongside the feedback that we're collecting through the complaints, what we're not collecting or haven't been collecting to this point in our iCase system, which is our central system, is the compliments and the positive feedback that we've also been receiving. So it's giving quite a skewed picture of where families are. So we've started recording that, the positive feedback and the compliments as well. And we'll also be introducing a monthly data summary report for all staff and our colleagues across education who have touch points with statutory Send, so that everybody is aware of our progress and the things that we still need to be focused on in terms of improvement and our actions. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you for that. Members, any questions? Martin, Councillor Lovell.
Thank you, Chair. Martin Lovell. The findings of strategy, if the, pertinent to something that I'm dealing with at the moment, if the policy of dealing with this all is longer than the statutory period that somebody's supposed to, I think it's 20 weeks to get a response from the EHCP in place. Let's say the education psychologist is not available and so on. Do we have the liability of not having met our statutory requirement? And although I can see this is going to go some of the ways dealing with complaints, how do we deal with that particular thing that we are outside our statutory limits? Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, we do have to manage working within our statutory requirements of the 20 weeks, and we are really struggling to do that. So that's a focus within our wider teams in terms of recruiting additional educational psychologists to work through that. But in the interim, in the here and now, what families need, because we can't magic up assessments any quicker than we're already working really hard to do. But what we do need to be doing, and we're thinking about how we can do better, is our communication with families to keep them updated on if an EP has been allocated yet, who that EP is, what the likely timescales will be, and their wait time for those assessments. And our educational psychology colleagues are looking at how they can almost have like a kind of live feed on their website, which will give kind of up-to-date live, as possible as we can, live updates on the numbers that we're working through and the likely wait times. So at least families can see some movement there, which will give some reassurance when we can't actually, it's slightly outside of our control because of the volumes to get those assessments done in the timeframes.
Thanks very much. Could I have, is it possible, I mean, do it outside of here, maybe a link that I could refer to it? How do we get the complaint in the system is basically is what I'm getting at.
Sorry, just clarify what the ask is.
So if
Are you
somebody,
looking-
you know, any of us could be asked, if we say, well, who do we talk to?
Okay.
Can we just have maybe an email address?
So I can, I'll put our send complaints email address in the chat for you. And I'll also send you the link to the educational psychology page where we're looking to develop that area so you can see those kind of regular updates.
I know that one of the points that I was going to talk is there was a conversation in about how parents access the complaint system. You in your report you talk about there are different routes in. I think picking up on Martin's point and one of the points I was going to make, I think it would be helpful to have a flow chart of some sort, so that as members we can make reference to that, but also we can signpost parents to that flow chart to the process, and included in that would be, I'm assuming, the email address so that it can be more publicly made aware. So if you have an issue, this is the first thing you need to do. If it's not satisfied, then you go to the point 2 or 3, etc. That'll make things a little better. And having the ability to see progress, to me, over the time that I've been looking at comms has always been an issue. The reason you get parents making more noise is because they're not hearing back for stuff, which is then creating more backlog. So the fact that seems to be being dealt with, I think, is high. It at least sounds positive. We'll see as we go forward. But I think that will cover the point of flow chart of some sort. Do you want to come back?
Thank you, Chair. Just to clarify the 2 routes in, so we would always be encouraging families to go through the Somerset Council complaints kind of page. And now that I've got my new service manager, they'll be looking to update that with all of that information in terms of what does the process look like, what can you expect, frequently asked questions. So that is in train. For members, and councillors, if you have you need a point of contact around complaints, then through the send complaints mailbox, which we're monitoring on a daily basis so that we can link you in with the allocated officer.
Super, thank you. Evie.
Hi, thank you. Welcome. I noticed a few times you said during the statistical part that you're thinking about the learning that you can take. Is that what comes across in the actions for improvement, like your empowerment, reviews, guidance, and new introductions? Because sitting here and saying what learnings you can take, well, what are those new learnings? Because it's easy to say it and we haven't got a clue what you're talking about. Sorry.
That's okay. So one of the things that we're looking at doing is reviewing our IK system, which is our central system for complaints, so that we can set it up so it's pulling through the key themes and the trends, so that my disputes and resolutions service manager, who's overseeing our complaints work, will be looking at that on a monthly basis and pulling through those themes and then reporting into me, so that I can report onto you and other members around what are the themes that are coming through, but also what are the actions that have been taken and what impact has that had.
Thanks for that. Councillor Hunt, John.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'm staggered to see new guidance to all frontline staff to ensure they contact families directly via the phone as soon as the complaint is received. I mean, I appreciate before your time this fee, obviously, but I'm staggered to think that's something new. I mean, isn't the very first thing you do when you receive a complaint, whether you're council, private business, whatever you may be, is to action that as soon as you possibly can? And if you've got a phone nearby, ring that person and just cut it out. It just seems incredible to me that we haven't, as a council, come up with something better than that prior to this. I mean, that's an obvious thing to do. Just moving forward, sorry. In terms of recruitment, you mentioned there was some issues getting some staff in, which I fully understand. I think that's probably a nationwide thing as well as here. Is that any of that related to we're not offering enough money to people, or is that just part and parcel of it? And is that situation improving?
Thank you, John. So to the first point, in terms of picking up the phone and making that call, it seems a very obvious thing. And the reality is that the teams working on the front line that are under enormous pressure in terms of the workload. And actually, sometimes it feels like it's quicker to do an email response. And actually, that isn't what families are wanting. They do want a follow-up email response, but actually they want a conversation first. The other challenge that we had is that complaints were coming in through lots of different routes in and getting lost in the system. So tracking them down and pushing them through to the right officer was quite a challenge. And we also found that several people had touch points and several people were picking it up, but nobody actually knew that somebody else was dealing with it. So all of those things needed working through. And your second point, which was, I've just forgotten what it was, staffing and recruitment. Yes, I think there is something about, there are other local authorities who pay better, and that is a challenge. However, we have had quite a lot of interest in the positions. I think that we've been quite selective in terms of who we have recruited to. We did successfully recruit somebody, and we were really positive about their start, and they were due to start in September. And unfortunately, they were unwell and were not able to take up that position. So we were excited about that recruitment, and it didn't work out. And so what we're doing is we've got Katie Knight in place for our secondment, which feels really positive because she can hit the ground running, and then we can think about how we go out to recruit and do it well and successfully.
Thank you. Heather, did you want to come back on that?
Only really quickly to say I absolutely sympathise with you, John, in terms of I'm of the era, the vintage where you pick up the phone straight away as opposed to emailing. But there is, I think there's also something about, and what they're working on in the background is to make sure that a lot of our workers are out and about, so it's not always easy to ring. But there's nothing worse than ringing up when you don't really know the context, because you can feel quite, I think I can feel quite blindsided just speaking to a member of the public if I can't know a little bit more about it before I, other than saying hello. So I think there's something about getting those systems right and making sure that our communication is really good quality all of the time. And I know the guys are working on that phenomenally. And just wanted to say as well on educational psychologists, I hadn't realised until recently that ed psychs, they have to be PhD qualified, they have to be registered. It's like creating another doctor. And so when you have a national shortage of them, which we do have, they can pretty much close your ears, any EPs who might be listening, they can virtually ask for what they want in terms of where they want to work or what they want to work for, because they're in short supply. And you can't grow your own in the same way because it takes years. So I just wanted to throw that one in because I hadn't realised, and perhaps you might not have known that also.
And the recruitment of ed psychs was an ongoing saga for this committee a number of years ago. So it's something that comes around regularly. Going online then, Habib, your question, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, once again. Extremely high complaint volume and poor resolution rate is really concerning. I mean, I read through the report, and I'm actually quite encouraged that the disputes and resolution service manager role actually is filled now. This is my understanding. Am I correct? Going into the severe delays in education, health, and care plan. Is the pressure is increased by over 30%, as I understand it. This is obviously compounded by insufficient specialists, as mentioned, by Heather, that psychologists, speech language therapists, send case officers, and so on. My question is, what happens when during that, a case that send case officer changes? What sort of delay would that impose on the whole process, and how do you have that in your way that you organize the structure, that someone else will take on immediately and move on with it, or would that actually create more delays? So, and the other thing is, how do you address the problem of, you know, having these specialists at the school giving the right advice to the parents or to the family? Thank you.
Thank you. In terms of delays when frontline staff change and officers move on or leave the service, or we're just moving cases around, there shouldn't be a significant delay when officers change. That's not really where the delay is, because we reallocate cases pretty quickly. There can be a challenge when there's more, when individuals are holding higher caseloads because they're picking up work from colleagues who have left the team. That's not typically where we see the delays. We see the delays in the statutory send system at other touch points, like at the point of doing assessment, like at the point of finalising different sections within the plan, and at the point of consultations with settings. So that the change of officers doesn't have a huge impact in terms of delays. What it does do, though, is it does break that relationship and that chain of communication that a family might have built up with one particular officer. Your second question, I think I've just forgotten what that was. Can you just remind me?
I think it was the lack of specialists, you know, educational psychologists, speech and language therapists, you know, in a special school. How is that going to affect students that are there?
Yeah. So it's not just our educational psychologists who are those specialists that are supporting and advising schools. That is a role that my team in particular have in terms of that direct work with settings and with families, particularly where children are struggling. So it's not necessarily just as educational psychologists, they are one part of that team, but actually in terms of the direct work with settings and with families, that tends to be more in my team and some of our wider colleagues across education attendance, our FIS teams and our inclusive curriculum and training team.
Thank you, Hebby. Fiona, just for some clarity then. So we're talking about education, health and care plans in real terms, aren't we? The complaints, and I'm assuming most of the complaints are that parents aren't necessarily receiving the initial response that they would have expected. I know that this is for Heather, that the council has made efforts to improve that process going forward. So it's only a snapshot. Things that are you happy? Are you content with the direction of travel that the service is going in? That we may be able to hit these issues, deal with the issues before they become complaints?
Yes, I am confident. What I am concerned about still is the capacity within the virtual school and send assessment and review, where we're still struggling with recruitment. My team in the virtual school are spending this whole week interviewing, which is really positive, but that is our constant challenge. In terms of the structure in place and the processes, I am very confident that they are moving in a positive direction. And from talking to colleagues who have worked in this space for a while, particularly with our customer experience team, they have noted that whilst it may not look like it in terms of the data on the page, actually we're in the best position that we've been in terms of managing complaints, responding to complaints and resolving the issues outside of the complaint process. We have got a lot of work to do, but I think we've made positive progress in the last 3 months.
Thank you. And I'll move slightly to the executive member in relation to the Heather. To me, over the past couple of years with dealing with this, there's always been an issue about capacity, and we seem to be in an ever decreasing circle in and hopefully with the new policies and procedures are in place is there. But can I ask, and I suppose the relevant point here, how confident are you that executive will be supporting the service? Because it's embarrassing when you consider the number of complaints that go, when you have when the Ombudsman is finding against Somerset pretty much 100% of the time because of comms issues. So are executive going to be putting in enough resource and support to help bring this down? Because at the end of the day, it's young people that are suffering.
Couldn't agree more. And I think it's interesting when we've been looking at the transformation for the whole council, we do different things. We look at those things that require just doing what we do, but do it better. There's some issues like that. And I put communications into that, because wherever possible, that's the directing, our people to make sure we converse and really keep the parents on board before they lose faith and lose the relationship with us. That doesn't cost very much. It's a different way of working. Then you have other things where perhaps we could do it if we had a little bit more, we do better if we had a little bit more input or resource for it. And we have a third style, which is where we're going to do something completely different, which is radical and off the page. Those are three different things. And we have got activities in all of those three categories. For instance, the fact that, Fee is recruiting again all of this week is not because the structure wasn't given to her to do the job, but because we had 27 vacancies, I think, in March, and we've still got 20 vacancies now. So some of it's the issue about actually recruiting into those jobs. The challenge for us, we had a conversation about this morning with executive members and all us around. What are we doing to make this the most attractive and desirable place to work? Are we actually getting, we might have 20 jobs, but are they at the right amount? So we're constantly trying to say, and we'll accept business cases and encourage business cases. That's me being very royally the whole of the executive. I'm sorry about we will do this, but the exec is wants to see business cases coming through if those things are not pitched right. But at the moment, we've got to get them in. So I am feeling very assured if we can do all of the things, this wide range of things around the DMP and other changes within children's services, we'll be fine. Because your point, Chair, is the right one. It's not the number of complaints we have, it's the number of complaints we stop becoming complaints, either because they're not bothered, because they're happy, or because when they've raised an issue as an inquiry, we deal with it then, and it's not the frustration as well as the lack of service that makes them push it into a stage 1 or a stage 2 complaint. So I think we're on the same page, and I can see, but we have to pull all of this off. And if we can't recruit people, that will be an issue. So I'm not saying this all, oh, absolutely, I can just go home now. We have to make all of these different business cases come together. And it's not just one thing that will solve the complaints problem by any means.
Thank you. Okay, then, members, thank you for that. In summary, just for clarity, so Fiona, one point is it would be interesting in the report to see the numbers, the quantities are there, but the theme or the reason for that complaint would be helpful to be able to see, because one of the things I went back over previous findings against this, and it became quite regular, the things that were coming back. Some of the reason why the committee asked for you to come today is because previously this information was happening without any knowledge of this committee. So what I would suggest for one of our outcome trackers is that, because I noticed that, is it 6 monthly you're reporting? That did it say?
I believe so, yeah.
Yeah, so if that report could be copied into this committee, but also what I would ask is something that hasn't happened previously, is if any serious findings, so if the Ombudsman come out with findings, that the chair and vice chair are copied in with those outcomes, because I've had to subscribe to the online system to get the copies of everything else. So, and it was only because of that I became aware of the rationale behind it. So an outcome will be that maybe if the report can come every 6 months, any issues in the meantime come to us directly. That will help us then be able to feed in to the committee, because at the end of the day, what the committee wants to do is make your job, add weight to your issues or concerns so that we make children's lives better. Off of soapbox. Thank you very much for that. Okay, that's the end of that item. What I'm suggesting we do, we've been doing very well with timing. Famous last words, Jamie. Sorry, I said it then. Is we'll take Jenny. Sorry. I'm just. We'll. That's fine. We'll take a comfort break now. It is 25 past. If we, I will be starting at 25 to. then that gives us an opportunity then for the next item and a comfort break. So that's 10 minutes or 9 minutes now, members, please. Places strategy, it's there and included. Obviously we'll be taking questions as we at the end, so please indicate if you want to ask questions. I will remind you to please stay at a strategic level and steer clear of local elements, please. Just for clarity, Jenny, you wanted to declare an interest. You need to put your microphone on. So
I have just applied for one of said places.
okay, thank you. That's fine. If it starts to become pecuniary, we'll make sure that's there. But thank you for that. We'll know that declaration. So slides are about to come up. There we are. Phil, over to you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Just by way of introduction, did you want to introduce yourself?
I don't mind. In the interest of time, Phil.
Thank you, Heather.
Right.
Just by way of introduction, this item will be in two parts. So there is the Education Places Strategy, which is a document we are taking for a key decision at Executive to publish on November the 5th. And then there is a second set of slides, which you do not have at the moment, but I will share from my laptop and then give to Aishi to share with the minutes that talks about the issue of secondary place pressures more generally. So in terms of the Education Places Strategy, we're just the key bits, the ask of you and the key points of discussion on that lead slide. If we go to the next one, please, I'll just take you through what this document is and why we have it. So the strategy itself replaces the School Place Planning Infrastructure Growth Plan from 2019. And the reason that it's been such a long time is firstly because of COVID, and secondly because of our various restructures. All parts of education sufficiency are now in one place for the first time under me. So I wanted the strategy to reflect the entire education system from early years through mainstream and specialist and other bits and pieces like alternative provision. So it's taken a huge amount of co-production with colleagues from property and planning and others to produce an updated document which replaces that 2019 version. But essentially what the strategy does is sets out the principles which underpin all of our decision making regarding the delivery of state maintained education places in Somerset. It sets out the principles for education place planning. It also links and provides the latest school population forecast, which is typically published in March of each year, and the strategy that local authority has for addressing both shortfalls and surplus places across Somerset. We also talk about the local first approach, and in simple terms, this means that in each community, every child, regardless of their age and need, should be having their needs met in a local school. Now, as those needs become more complex, local becomes slightly broader in terms of the number of schools that can meet that need, but we want to move away from children having to travel long distances to access education. So this strategy document talks about the local first approach and how we aim to make sure we have sufficient places of all types to meet all needs in every community. And the reason that's important is it facilitates improved engagement between the settings and families. It enables active travel, which improves physical health, and it reduces travelling time and associated travelling costs. It also allows children to engage in extracurricular activities where they exist. They are the statutory duties in regard to the Childcare Act and the Education Act 1996, just set out exactly what we should be delivering in terms of early years places and places for children of statutory school age. And then moving on to our principles. So education place planning is really, really complex, and it kind of treads a fine line between art and science much of the time. And a key factor in Somerset is the prolonged falling of our birth rate. So whilst we see lots and lots of houses being delivered in many parts of the county, our birth rate, and we'll see the detail in a minute, our birth rate has been falling since 2011 fairly steadily. Also, where we have space emerging in many of our rural primary schools, secondary schools not so much yet, because our bulge is just working its way through the secondary system. It allows us to consider using those spaces for different things, such as early years provision, alternative provision, satellite provisions of our special schools, resource spaces and SEN units. Birth rates. So you'll see the graph in front of you, but essentially since 2011, Somerset's birth rates have been falling steadily. So at peak in 2011, we had 5,764 live births in 2024, and that data only became available earlier this month. We had 4,621, so over 1,100 less live births in Somerset. So that's a really important factor. But if we look at our health data, actually we've had an increase of children aged 0, so children aged under 1 has increased year on year. And the reason for that is that we have a significant amount of inward migration. So while our birth rates are going down, inward migration is helping to keep numbers stable in some areas. Surplus places is, it's an aspiration for us to maintain 5% surplus capacity in the education system in some areas. In reality, in some places, that is impossible to do. We cannot maintain 5% capacity, particularly in places like Taunton, where we have a secondary place pressure at the moment. And in our specialist system, we will never have 5% capacity. We already have a very significant use of the independent sector, which is largely our best indicator of sufficiency in specialist provision. So at the moment, we have just over 600 children and young people accessing independent provision in the specialist sector. So you would argue that we are at least 600 places short in terms of state maintained specialist provision. New housing. So you can see that post-COVID, we had a significant upturn in the number of new houses delivered across Somerset. So kind of 2,400 in 2 consecutive years. But in the last couple of years, in terms of reporting data, the number of new houses being delivered has fallen significantly. And whilst we have large developments that are coming forward and large developments that are live, the build out rates are significantly short of what planners published, and they're the numbers that we put in our projections. So we have this range of competing factors. We have a falling birth rate, we have increasing inward migration, we have lots of housing developments, but the build out rates are kind of quite volatile, but largely slower than anticipated. So we have to factor all of that into our projection work, and that's where we stumble between art and science much of the time. Developer contributions are a real challenge. So the DFE would argue that where we have large developments, the developer will fully mitigate the impact of that development in regard to education places. So in theory, if you have 1,000 new homes in a development, you will need a new primary school, and the developer should fully fund that primary school. You would also expect another 150-ish children to require secondary education places for that development. And again, the developer should provide enough money for us to deliver an additional 150 places. As it stands, we are competing for a limited pot of money alongside our colleagues from highways, affordable housing and health. And there simply isn't enough in terms of the totality of developer contributions to fully mitigate the impacts of Somerset's large developments. So whilst we can say, and we will ask for the full amount in terms of education places, it is quite typical for us to be given less than we require, and therefore the council through borrowing has to meet the gap or decide that it won't fully mitigate the impact of that development in terms of additional education places and look to offset that by moving children to other schools in a different community. Is that the last slide, Ayushi? So just to summarise, that strategy document is going to executive on the 5th of November. It replaces a document last published in 2019, but for the first time incorporates all parts of the state maintained education system from early years through mainstream, through specialist, and it's here for your kind of feedback and information today.
Do you want to take the responses to that now?
Any questions on this bit now, Chair? Yeah, thank you.
Okay, Councillor Hunt, you were first to wave.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, thank you for that, Phil. Where I'm a little bit lost was about the local first policies that we have. I understand how that works, but it is usurped by academisation, isn't it? So the academy I mean, can I use a local school? It's not an issue, just an example. So a local school was Orchard Grove, which was built and is now instantly academised. That meant that because the secondary school locally to it, it now takes priority over all the council schools within the same catchment local area. So all of those local schools that aren't part of that academy now go behind Orchard Grove School. Now that's why my own local school, part of the reason is why we academised, so that our school children would gain the same rights as Orchard Grove. But then those other primary schools locally in Taunton, there's 3, 4, 5 of them, haven't done that. So they are actually set behind a school because it's as part of an academy. So although it's our localised idea, it doesn't actually work because a lot of schools don't even near, all the schools are closer than Orchard, for example, but Orchard gets priority. So I just wondered how that works and whether there's a way we can, as a council, we can do something about that.
Thank you, John. So I'll break that into 2 parts. So in terms of meeting our local first approach, we delivered a primary school in the heart of the Orchard Grove community. So we have met the local first approach in terms of primary places. In terms of Orchard Grove children from the Comitro development requiring secondary places, that sits in the Castle School catchment. Now, we know that when the Blackdown Education Partnership, they consulted on the Castle School's admission arrangements to include a feeder school over subscription criteria. And it was largely unpopular, and it's something that we challenged and was upheld by the office of the school's adjudicator. In that, we didn't think it was a relevant clause for Orchard Grove because Orchard Grove wouldn't have year 6 children for up to 4 years. Now, because it's been unpopular over subscription criteria, the partnership has diluted the wording, and in its most recent admissions arrangements has moved it down to the bottom of the oversubscription criteria, which makes it largely redundant because catchment children, there are far usually more catchment children than there are places in Castle School. So it's a very localised issue, but we met our local first approach by delivering a brand new primary school in the heart of a new development.
So but I'll put it into my words. We can put the schools in the places we think they're best, but how they're managed is the bit that we don't have the necessarily element of control over. I think that's right. Okay, thank you. Dawn.
Thank you. And I promise to do my best not to become parochial, but as Phil knows, we have huge challenges in my patch at the moment, which I will keep it generic to this strategic document, which I do find really helpful because I've had to learn an awful lot and struggled to find where to get the information. So I think this will be very helpful for people to be able to go and see the strategy. There are some bits which I would have perhaps liked to have added into it to be helpful to parents or anybody that gets signposted to see this document as a way of explaining how things work. So I'll come on to those in a minute. Specifically, I just wanted clarity on page 70. It said the chair said it didn't need to come to committee. It was just for information only. And I just wondered if somebody could explain why the document didn't come to scrutiny for discussion before it was finalised.
So
I've got a number of questions. Do you want to do them one by one?
This is coming to scrutiny for our comments prior to it going to executive for decision.
Yeah, but it said specifically on page 70, it did not need to come to committee. It was only here for information.
Sorry. So just for that particular policies that are children specific go to the chair of those committees for initial comment. So at the time, I'd looked at one of the draft and I'd seen that there was no issues that I had concerns with. So that actually says that I had no issues of concern. However, before it goes to executive, it would come. So it was part of it. I was one of the consultees during its progress.
Okay, thank you for that explanation. Sorry, I'll just have to go back to my other concerns at page 72. It says there are no climate change and sustainability implications, or there are no health and well-being implications. Now, I understand in the strategy it has, plans for local first and no transporting children across town, what have you. But where you are transporting children across long distances, if you can't meet all the other criteria that you would like to, in an ideal world, be able to offer, there are going to be climate and sustainability implications, and there are going to be health and well-being implications. So I was just slightly surprised to see them say there were none in that section. I just wondered if you could address that, especially because we've got this local first, but it's not always available, as you've explained with one example. There are many examples where local first isn't deliverable. So I would like to see more in the report about the implications on climate and sustainability and health and well-being of children, where that does in fact have to take place. Because we do, it says in the page 69 that we want children to have the best experience in education, and that is the aim. But unfortunately, if we're not able to meet the nearest school first criteria, where they're not getting the best education because they can't do the after school clubs, they're being transported long distances, etc., etc. So it's where they cannot be met. I just think we need more in the document to sort of explain why that has not been able to be met, and what that we are actually not potentially meeting our aims where they can't be met. Page 81 lists the order in where demand exceeds existing capacity places, how it will be delivered. So it lists 4 points in order that you'd work through. If the top 3 cannot be met, we arrive back at transporting children across large distances. So it kind of feels that we can have this aim for all these great ambitions, but if we can't meet any of them, children are going to be ferried across long distances. And I just feel that point is not really coming across, because it says that the desire is new school funding and developer contributions, and I'm not quite sure entirely how you get that money, and how you ensure you get that money. If you recognise there is a need for a new secondary school, what powers do you actually have to ensure that happens? Because if it goes to one of many asks of SIL funds, how are you going to ensure that will be prioritised so that a new school is delivered where it's needed? I would like to have seen more in there about the strategy, about future funding, and developer contributions, really. Have you actually drawn up a specification for a new provision? Has that gone to the Secretary of State for Education? I wasn't clear. You say that you have the power to do that. And I know we've had lots of conversations about the potential need for a new secondary in my side of town. But I wasn't sure if you've actually drawn up a specification for that and whether it's going through to the Secretary of Education. Are you aware of any trusts that are currently looking at it? So that's understood from the paper. There's 2 options of how a new secondary school can be built. Are you aware of any trusts bringing forward a proposal? What is the best scenario for SC? I was trying to understand how the funding works. It seemed that if a trust applied, they had access to grants, whereas if the council applied, it wasn't clear to me what grants are available to councils to support them if they do find they need to build a new school. So more information in that section, I think, would have been useful about funding streams for councils if they do need to build a new school. Some recent planning applications in my area have had a list of the SIL ask, and it shows all the calculations of how that's been provided, how that figure's been arrived at. And I found that really helpful to have on planning portals so residents can see what the SIL ask is. And I don't know, is that something you will continue to do through the planning process? Because it's useful for residents to see how much money is involved in in the ask for a new school or contributions towards new schools provision by these developers. I think that's really helpful to see, and I'd like to see that continued.
Dawn, do you want to pause for a second?
I think I'm nearly there.
It's just that I'm conscious that I going backwards and forwards, and I can't remember the third question, let alone the fifth point. So it
Well,
might be
there's
worth
one more.
just
It's up to you entirely whether I
do
say
the one
now.
more, and then but we may have to clarify. That's all.
So that's fine. And the final thing I wanted to ask is, while this is really, really important and useful document, it doesn't really explain the process. And I've had to try and learn and explain to my residents the whole application process for secondary schools. Is there another document where that is laid out really clearly for parents and residents about how decisions are made, how what factors are taken into account in placing children at what schools? Because I think that would be a really helpful document if there isn't one already in existence. And whether it could be added into this strategy, I don't know. I'll shut that. As you know,
Heather, do you want to jump in?
I was just going to make a start, and then I'm sure Phil will have specific answers on a number of those things. I think I just want us to be very clear. This is just a policy, one policy about the principles that underpin decision making, and some of those dark arts that we talked about the tricks, about what we have to do. It isn't the only document that would ever talk about what we might desire to do if we want to build a new school, or what the admissions, there are admissions policies and procedures, and there are separate things. What to do to get yourself into a school is one thing. That's somewhere else on the website. This is simply looking at underpinning the principles that we are applying. Sometimes we can get more power to our elbow with academies or colleagues or whatever we want to get them, get the power to say, this is our aim. Most policies are an aim, and they will prioritize what we do and in what order. And to my mind, I know those 4 points that you mentioned are really important, and I understand the pain you've been through, Dawn, locally, but it's numbers 1 to 3 that are key. Number 4 is the catch-all, and on occasion, no policy is going to make everything magically work. But what we need to be sure is that we are absolutely saying we'll do points 1, 2, and 3 before we do 4. And I think the only thing I was going to say in terms of climate, and because I wondered about that when I read the report, then I thought, no, well, hang on, but think about it, because most of the time, the majority, I would imagine, of the transport that we put in place for children who have to go to a school that's further away tends to be on buses. So that's one vehicle, as opposed to however many, 15, 20 that might be driving someone to school. So I think if it's that bit about the aim of this policy is to ensure that we are more climate sustainable, that we are health sustainable, and that children go to school locally because that's better for them. So I just wanted to put that kind of context, that this is so I wouldn't have been expecting to see, and although it's mentioned this is how we go about trying to get a school, we wouldn't be talking about in something dated 2025 that has to last for a few years, and we're making this application for a school, if that makes sense. I don't know if that's helpful, Phil, or just to remember what this is and isn't as a document. It's only got a certain role.
Thank you, Heather. Yeah, I think going back to your sustainability point, the intention of this policy is to keep children close to home and keep them off of school transport. But I think, as Heather said, the catch-all is if we can't do that for whatever reason, then to meet our statutory duty, we will have to transport children to another school. Now, typically, thinking about the way that catchment or school oversubscription criteria work, we will be transporting children who are already being transported, if that makes sense. So it will tend to be those people in rural communities that already get transported to an education provision will be transported to another education provision, which may or may not be just as far. Now, going on to your points around seeking capital funding, the sufficiency duty sits with the local authority. Academies cannot source capital funds to expand their schools for sufficiency purposes. A large multi-academy trust would be what we call an SCA, which means they get a capital allocation for their general maintenance, but only the local authority can secure funding for sufficiency purposes. Now, as a local authority, we receive a relatively small basic need grant, which goes nowhere near what we need to deliver additional places based on general population growth. And in terms of developer contributions, if we think about the Orchard Grove Primary School, for example, that was a £13.5 million project only half of which was covered by developer contributions. The rest had to be covered by council borrowing. And this happens more and more frequently, in that the overall viability of a development will mean a reduction in the Section 106 or SIL that is available, which then impacts on the infrastructure or the funding of health, highways, education infrastructure, for example. Now, in terms of looking at that in more detail, that's not the job of this paper. That would be the job of our new local plan, acknowledging that Somerset currently has 4 local plans that each have different ways of collecting developer contributions and each have different ways of prioritising how those developer contributions are allocated. I think specifications for secondary school. So there is a specification. So there is a DFE published document called Building Bulletin 103. Within that will specify exactly what space you would need to put into a secondary school of a certain size. If we then took the decision to deliver a school of any type, we would refer back to Building Bulletin 103, and then we would contract with an architect and construction company, for example, and ask them to design a building that aligned with that specification, ensuring that we had sufficient surface area in terms of site on which to build it. So at the moment, whilst we recognise that we have secondary place pressures, and that will be the second part of this item, we have not progressed to looking at a specification for a secondary school. There are many more hurdles to overcome before we get that far down the decision path. And of course, we would have to bring a key decision back through the executive once we'd secured a site and all of the necessary funding through whatever sources to deliver a school of that type.
And just to come back on your first point about point 11, I've just checked my emails and I've sent clarification. So as part of members, you will all know that as part of the key decision-making process, the chairs of the appropriate scrutiny committees are asked for comment on the policies that as they go forward. In this instance, I'd replied back saying that as it's coming to this committee, I've got no comments to add because the comments from this committee will be fed into the decision. So that bullet point 11 isn't correct, but it'll be rectified, Dawn. But thank you for highlighting it. Okay, Francis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's developing this policy is between a rock and a hard place, and I know it requires huge amounts of effort and thought, and I value very much what's been done, and thank the officers very much indeed. I have 2 questions I want to ask. One does come within this paper, but doesn't often involve building anything. Under the Section 6 of the Childcare Act 2006, local authorities in England are responsible for ensuring that the provision of childcare is sufficient to meet the requirements of parents in their area for children aged 0 to 14 or up to 18 for disabled children. In every document where we talk about childcare, we talk about early years. I have, somewhere in this paper it gives a link to the current childcare sufficiency. Link doesn't work, but I was able to find it, and we're still in the same place, despite the fact that the heading in our sufficiency duty says up to 18. Doesn't actually, it's not there. That's just a general point. It may come to buildings sometimes, but we just need to remember that one. We don't do what we should do. The second one is I'm a little bit twitched about the use in this paper of catchment, because as we know, it doesn't exist, but we do have our transport areas, and academies and own admission authorities can change their oversubscription criteria as they like. The decision that was taken some time ago, which may have changed since I was involved, is that we don't change our transport areas because somebody else has changed their oversubscription criteria. I am a bit twitched about using catchment in the paper.
Thank you, Francis, for mentioning that, because I remember having a conversation with one of the officers about another policy, which was our school transport policy, where catchment is not mentioned at all because it's designated transport areas, which are. So I don't know. I'll just bring back over to Phil to see what he thinks about it, because I hadn't spotted that dichotomy. So I'm really grateful that you did. And if it's deliberately done, that's fine. But if it's not, it's
absolutely. But the reason for introducing designated transport areas was that a particular academy, when it became its own admissions authority many years ago, said, right, we will have the whole of the catchment of another school within ours, and that we will call it catchment, and that means the local authority will have to provide transport. And we said, oh no, it doesn't.
Broken finger. Thank you, Francis. So we have both catchments and we have designated school transport areas, and our travel assistance entitlement is built around the latter. Catchments are very much referenced by schools in their oversubscription criteria and prioritise children in a catchment over children not in a catchment. And you're right that as academies, as admission authorities, can determine their own catchments. Usually they do it in consultation with us, and often we will be supportive. Sometimes we won't be supportive. And of course, if a school wants to change its catchment, because every part of Somerset is covered by an existing catchment, it means they are trying to take other schools' children. And what you would typically have is another academy opposing the change because they would be saying, well, you're trying to take our children, they're our children. So catchments exist, designated transport areas exist. Where there is a proposal to change a catchment we do not agree with, we will go to the office of the school's adjudicator within the review period and ask for that decision to be challenged. Quite often, the office of the school's adjudicator will side with the local authority and prevent that multi-academy trust from changing its catchment boundary. But catchments are an important part of the education system in Somerset. In some local authority areas, they've gotten rid of catchments altogether, which would be a monumental undertaking. I think it's North Yorkshire did it most recently, and I was talking to my equivalent there about how they did it, because I could imagine all of the headaches it caused. But it's been about 6 years since they implemented it, trying to flush the system through, because you need to think about place planning in a very, very different way if you no longer have catchments.
Okay, thank you. Members, I'm conscious we've got, this is the first half of Phil's item, and we've got 2 other agenda items left to go through. And so, and I want to make sure that we get as much of this as we can. So I've got no more members in the room in this particular item, so I'm not going to come back for it. But Habib?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. While the report acknowledges that the net migration has returned to pre-pandemic level, it fails to differentiate between the types of inward migration, in particular children arriving through government-led employment or visa programs such as NHS Health and Care Visa Accelerator, and other Home Office schemes are not yet fully captured in the school population forecast. School, especially in proximity to NHS facilities, and mine being one of them near Musgrove Park Hospital, Yeovil District Hospital, Bridgewater Community Hospital, report mid-year admission that are not reflected in the annual census baseline used for the forecast, in my view. This creates unplanned localized pressure on school capacity, particularly in early years and key stages. Key stage 1, where the impact of families arriving midterm is most visible, and I see it on weekly, monthly basis. So how are we going to address that? Thank you.
I'll add a bit to that, actually, because one of the points I was going to come back to was you talked about inward migration, and I wanted to just be very clear on that. That's in reflects to people coming into the area for work and
Absolutely.
and for reasons. No, I concur, Habib. I'm just making sure. And my question was going to, because I was going to make reference to the birth rate diagram, which I think is really interesting. The fact, and the point I make very regularly is that as a council, we do our best to become aware of demand at the earliest opportunity, and that's usually birth rate data. However, you talked about inward migration. So how are we able to build on our picture? Because I'm assuming that the birth rate slide would, or the places expectations slide will change. Is there such a slide as well?
There is, thank you, Chair. So we publish our school places population forecast every March, and birth rate data is one of the key bits that goes into the overall calculation. We look at inward migration, we look at housing data, and we look at parental preference. In terms of school attendance, we also have children coming over borders into Somerset schools. We have Somerset children going over borders into schools in Devon, Dorset, North Somerset, etc. So when you combine all of those factors, that's where you arrive at your population forecast. And in the front of that document is the methodology statement, which sets out exactly how those numbers are calculated. Now, we recognise that, you know, as Councillor Babahi sets out, there are places where we have really high levels of inward migration. It's really impacted on the density of school age populations in certain towns. The same principle applies. Those parents have the ability to apply for any school of their choice. We can signpost them to where there are schools with places. Where the nearest school with a place is over statutory walking distance, we then step in with our statutory duty to provide travel assistance.
Thank you for that. So I'm just going to do a couple of questions from me. I think one of the points that I think would be helpful, there isn't an executive summary with this one, and it takes you a while to find the bits that are relevant. I don't know whether it would be a consideration to either have an executive summary that we can then use to highlight quickly to people what's going on, or to pinch a favourite little saying now, policy on a page, to see it, something like that, to try and find, because that would help signpost people a little bit and bring all the important relevant stuff, or give the author the opportunity to bring all the relevant stuff to the top of the, so that it's a lot of people will read the executive summary and not bother going any further. That's the information. Yeah, so it might be helpful that way to try and do things. And another point which I'm going to make, which I sort of pick up, and I think it could be a recommendation that we make, is that we need to find a way to make developers responsible for contributions in a more robust way. It's okay us saying you're going to build this out, etc., but we need to feed into those negotiations as well, and it's not, and developers use every opportunity they can to wiggle out of supporting the appropriate provision in the areas that they're building these big estates. So my suggestion was, recommendation wise, I'll come back to, but I don't think there's much objection there. Heather?
It's only a quick question, as much to Phil as everybody else, actually, which is, and we've talked about outside this room, Phil, about and you've mentioned the importance of the local plan. So for things like that relationship with developers and what might go into Section 106 agreements and SIL agreements and how tough we can be, I don't know, I'm asking Phil whether that's something that the local plan would be working as part of what they're working around, because that degree of control is really missing. We don't have, it's a developer's market rather than a council's market. And I think the other one was, in terms of, there is, you're right, the exec summary on this report is very short. It simply says what the report is, what the policy is covering. Is it something like, I don't know, like a couple of key points of the issues raised by it, or the issues we're trying to tackle by raising the policy? I was just wondering what extra bits you might want to see in there.
Well, the easy answer to that is it's policy on a page. What are you looking to achieve, and what are the limitations attached to that, or aims and objectives? And because you can make reference to the placements, etc., like that, and then so that was my thought. A concise element. I don't think there's any. Dawn, what was your point? Sorry.
just really conscious, if you can't expand your catchment and you can't expand any school in your area, it is getting down to that third point on the list, which is funding potentially a new school build. And I don't understand or know, and just wonder, how do those negotiations happen? You go forward with what you need for funding. Who then is making the decisions as to which things get what funding? And that would be really helpful to understand how important the education provision is perceived in whoever's making the decision as to where the still money goes. I don't know how that process happens.
Thank you, Dawn. So as I understand it, and there will be better qualified people within our planning department, as an education service and as a highway service and as an affordable housing service and as a health service, we will look at a planning application and we will determine what contribution we require in terms of, if it's a development of this size, there will be this many children, and we calculate that on a pupil yield. We will look at existing capacity in local schools within walking distance, and we will work out the difference and say, this is the additional amount of places we require at these place values, and we submit that as a request. And all of the various services put in their requests, and they say, here are our requests to meet our statutory duties. The planning officer will take those, meet with the developer and say, in order to approve this, these are the collective asks. The developer will look at that and say, that's reasonable. Or they might say, actually, that is not an affordable contribution because legislation or case law says that we have a level of protected profits which we must achieve, and they are essentially locked in. So after they've bought the land, built the houses, and adjusted for their profits, it's the bit that's left is the bit that gets shared out for contributions. So in that negotiation, bits are shaved off everywhere in terms of the Section 106 agreements.
You are then, whatever you felt you needed, you are then at the hands of a planning officer in terms of being told what you will get.
So the expectation we can set out, but the actual provision is outside of is planning is outside of this strategy's position. Okay, for quickly to summarise then my points, that there was debate and discussion about provision of placements and where it came. I think that clarity was there. What I will say is, members, you all have the opportunity to go along to the executive when they take the decision to feed in any points that are relevant. I'm just trying to do the generic ones from this committee generally. There was a suggestion about there was general support for the some strategy as laid out, and bringing together all of those elements, and I think this is a really comprehensive direction of travel for us, and it sets it out clearly. My suggestion or the consideration would for a policy on a page to help bring down, summarise things to do it. There was some Francis made some reference to the clarification around catchment, etc. But I think you came back and responded to that. And the ability, if we could, to have a big mallet to hit developers with would be another point, but that's outside of our control. But the point is referenced. Were there any points that I read? Because there were no recommendations that came forward. It was just my consensus for it.
I would like a recommendation around the climate and sustainability and the health and wellbeing impacts of having to transport children that could walk or cycle to their nearest schools.
Okay. The environmental impact of it, because it's a transport policy more than.
It's fine, Chair. What I will amend the decision paper to just update those sections and highlight the risk of having to transport children where we can't meet our local first aspirations.
Thank you, Dawn. Okay, members, thank you for that. Part 2. Bearing in mind you're going to have people starting walking in a minute.
Mic is not on. We have a levelling out of secondary age pupil numbers in 25 and 26, with a more substantial forecast decline beginning in 2027. We have a large year 7 admission group still to be accommodated in Bridgewater, Taunton and Yeovil, and a tendency towards smaller sixth forms in our secondary schools where they exist. What you've got there are the projected numbers of primary age and secondary age pupils. So you can see that primary age pupils are in steady decline. And then in terms of secondary age pupils, we're in a plateau as our bulge is working its way through the system, and then projected to start declining from 2027. Birth rates you have seen, so we've had steady decline from 2011, but if you think about our peak years were between 2010 to say 2015, our children are, so that bulge is in our secondary school right now and start to work its way through, and then in theory start declining. So we've talked about birth rates. The mitigating factors are large housing developments, particularly down the M5 corridor and in Chard, the NHS recruitment and the impact specifically on central Taunton. And that's not just an impact in terms of numbers, but many of these children are arriving as English as an additional language, which provides additional challenges to those schools. We have displaced people in the impact on South Bridgewater, particularly the hotel at Junction 24, where we're accommodating the children at Robert Blake and Northgate schools. Then we've got Hinkley Point as a significant factor in the additional workforce there, although we're not probably seeing the level of child and family impact that we forecast when the project initially set out. And then to a lesser degree, we have the impact of VAT on independent school fees. And we know that will impact some families and perhaps more in the future as the cost of living crisis bites harder. Specific place pressures. So Burnham and Highbridge, its current year 7 group, so they started in September of this year, they are overflowing into Bridgewater and Cheddar. In Bridgewater, we have a large, so it's currently a large year 6 group, but that's an incoming group for year 7 in September 2026. And we have live developments to the north, east, south and west of the town. I think it's worth acknowledging in terms of, you've seen, if we go back a few slides, you'll have seen projected numbers. What the projections do not include a significant proportion of our housing developments. So housing development has to be at a certain stage before it can be included in our calculations. So to give you a specific example, we know of 7,000 planned houses in the Taunton area. Only 1,000 of those houses are included in the population projections because only 1,000 have reached a certain stage. So you could multiply that around the county. There are thousands and thousands and thousands of homes that are in the planning pipeline, but have not come forward to a point where we can include them in our calculation. In the background, we do a second calculation, which alerts us to the potential risk or the worst case scenario. And it's something that we specifically worry about. And Taunton is a kind of point in case right now. So in Wellington, the last 2 year 7 entry groups have been bigger than the published admission number, and the next 4 entry groups expected to be at or over PAN. So we have invested quite significantly in Courtfields, giving it new classrooms, a new science room, a new dining area and a new theatre. But as stated on the slide, we will need to expand this school to have a capacity for 1,050 children and have submitted a bid to the council's capital investment programme. Over in Yeovil, we have large year 7 entry groups between 2026 and 2028. And then in Taunton, the NCY 7 entry groups for 2025 and 2026 exceed the number of available places and then are forecast to reduce. But as I've said, there is a huge volume of planned housing driving the need for more places. So whilst we are projecting a decline in pupil numbers, there are 6,000 planned houses that are not currently incorporated in our projections. So that's just a very high level overview of our secondary place pressures, just for information more than anything else today, because we're having these discussions in parallel in other forums, and I know in some areas this is an acute concern.
Phil, thank you. And I think that's really helpful information. And I'm also conscious that we could be talking about this for the next 3 days, let alone. So what I was going to suggest is I think that's really interesting. So would it be possible, it's not confidential slides, are they, in any way? So would it be possible you share those with Ayushi so that she can share them with members? And members, what I would suggest, rather than we get caught up in a conversation that could, if we used it, I think this adds a lot of context to the previous bit and it helps us going forward. It may be worth us taking it away from this meeting and then if you have feeding questions into me or Phil, but more to the point, if we think it's an item that has to come back, then let's bring it back. Otherwise we're going to get caught up. I've got 2 members, but is there any objections to that position? Okay, so Andy, remember that before you start.
Sorry, Chair, mine's a very quick one. It's just a point of information, really. When he says we've got 6,000 homes that are still in the planning stage that haven't been incorporated, I'd just be interested to know how many children that would equate to if all 6,000 suddenly became available.
I'm conscious. I get that, and let Dawn ask her point, and let me just see if I can probably move this on.
And from my experience, the main difficulty as a councillor has been getting the right information to residents and parents. So I would really appreciate you considering doing some briefing article, something which highlights some of these difficulties that you are facing across Somerset, because the parents are suddenly faced with not getting their schools that they had expected to, and they don't understand why. And I think the more we can be ahead of that conversation, the better it is for everybody. And I think there's not enough information out there for parents or residents to be forewarned of some of these pressures. And I would really like, if we are going to be doing some work for councillors, sharing information, I would really like to make a request that something is published in some way, shape or form that alerts parents to the challenges and the situation, explains it quite straightforwardly and simply in a way that they are alerted to the situation.
Okay, I think the information you just provided there would make a really good members information sheet, because there are lots of members, lots of issues out there. And also, Dawn, just to add a bit to you, and I'll say this without asking officers to comment, we also have a lot of councillors that don't fully understand the elements in relation to that. The members of this committee are probably more engaged than others, but so my suggestion, so Phil, what I'm suggesting to the members, to circulate it to us so that we can circulate it now and feedback in. What I will say is, and I'm not looking to, it's more to Heather now, to you, is that it would make a really good member information sheet in relation to taking the strategy that we've just, and the planning that's there out. It would be helpful for as many members as.
Could I just add into that the process for parents? I know there are things you can find online about how applications happen and what have you, but the process is not always really clear and accessible for residents and parents.
In the same way, Dawn, you can really lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink. So yes, I accept what you're saying. I accept what you're saying, and I think I apologise. So I think the point I was trying to get at, I was going to take outside that what we do, the members' information sheet would then become an ideal tool for us to put into a better language, the fact to help our residents as well, and that's something that we're there. So, Heather.
Just want to say very quickly, I'm looking over my shoulder at Ali, because Ali is our business partner for communications, Ali Lang, who's sitting just to my left back here and taking it all in. I just wanted to assure yourself, Dawn, and everybody else that the desire to have the best communications we have for parents is absolutely topmost, and we're working on it, working through all the communication that we have. So I think, yes, let's try and get a members briefing, a members information sheet, perhaps with a briefing, as Alex was saying. We can, put a briefing on for those people who want to come along, and then that's that job done. So more than happy to try, and we've been working with Phil.
And an opportunity to signpost as many members of the public to that as well, because to make sure that the process is clear.
Andy, just to answer your question, 6,000 houses based on pupil yield data. So secondary places, we would expect those houses to generate 840 secondary age pupils. And that's why and we would expect that same number of houses to generate 1,920 primary age children. So it's kind of one secondary school and 4.5 primary schools.
And just to add a bit to that, and the developers are very clever, because it might be that they bring a house to a certain level and then within 1 year finish more than you expect. So there's those surprises that come along as well. So okay, members, I'm still very conscious that it's after 4:30 now, and we need to move on. So